everybody. Welcome to our Driftless Dialogue series of talks. My name is Lynn Kronschnabel. I'm the new executive director here. Just going into my 4th month here and really excited to be at this first Driftless Dialogue talk. We had a couple that were canceled because of bad weather, so we're glad that cooperated with us today. I also wanted to introduce Maggie Mankey. She's our new education coordinator. She started this week on Monday. Maggie has been the science teacher at Hillsborough High School, has a lot of great experience to bring to the KVR, so you'll be seeing her more in the future. Just a thing I wanted to pass around for our record keeping. If you haven't signed in, I'll set this, or I'll give this to the front row here. Please sign in. That is important for us to keep track. The Ralph Nuzum lecture series is free thanks to a grant by the Ralph E. Nuzum Kickapoo Reforestation Fund through the UW-Madison College of Agriculture and Life Sciences and the Friends of the Kickapoo Valley Reserve, and supported by Badger Talks. So I'd like to introduce Scott. Scott was here, I think, 3 or 4 years ago.
3 years ago.
So we welcome him back. Scott Spoolman is a science writer who has focused on the environmental sciences, especially those stories of natural science and environment related to Wisconsin and surrounding states. He grew up in northern Wisconsin and earned a master's degree from the University of Minnesota School of Journalism with an emphasis on science reporting. He has co-authored several editions of a series of environmental science textbooks. His most recently published book is titled Wisconsin Waters, The Ancient History of Lakes, Rivers, and Waterfalls. So thank you, Scott,
thank you, Lynn.
for coming back.
Thank you, Lynn. Morning, everybody. It's nice to see you. Well, it's great to be here again. As Lynn said, I presented my Wisconsin Rocks book here about 3 years ago, fall of 2019. BC, that's before COVID. And Gail and I thoroughly enjoyed that visit. You know, it's always a lot of fun to talk to a dedicated group like yourselves because you're dedicated to something great. And so I gave the Kickapoo Valley Reserve some special attention in my newest book, Wisconsin Waters, The Ancient History of Lakes, Rivers, and Waterfalls, published by the Wisconsin Historical Society Press. The book seeks to take you on a journey to explore geologic and natural history in Wisconsin by using the waterways as entry points. And it's in the same vein as the other book with the Historical Society Press, the Wisconsin State Parks, Extraordinary Stories of Geology and Natural History. Both books include trail and travel guides to help you get out and see for yourselves what I'm writing about. In between those two books came the Wisconsin Rocks. This is published by a different publisher, Mountain Press Publishers, and this is more of a guidebook. It covers 52 sites all over the state of Wisconsin. Complements the historical material in my other books. And so before we start, in on Wisconsin Waters, I just want to thank some people who made it possible for us to be here. The director, Lynn, congratulations, Lynn, welcome to the Kickapoo Valley Reserve. And Summer and Erica and other people who've helped to make this place run. I also want to give special thanks to my fellow explorer, my wife, Gail Martinelli, who's in the second row back there on the right. Gail, she's my partner in this effort, as in all that we do. She helps me immeasurably with ideas and research, photos. A lot of the photos in the book Gail took. And managing, of course, and bossing, and no. Thank you, Gail. So, people often ask me how I got interested in writing these books, and I've been fascinated with Wisconsin's natural settings, the fields, forests, waterways, since I was about 5. when my older brother John took me on the first of many hikes in the woods and fields around our hometown of Cumberland, Wisconsin. And that's in the northwest corner of the state. I don't know if you know Barron County. My first hike probably was the area we hiked probably looked something like that. Later, we moved to Hayward, where I went to high school, and John got me out canoeing before too long. This photo kind of dates us, as you can see, before the age of color photography. But I fell in love with the Nemacolin River and proudly dedicated the book to my brother. Regarding Wisconsin's waterways, there's plenty to talk about. Water is so important to us here in Wisconsin. I don't need to tell you that, but I summarized it in the following passage of my book's preface, which also kind of neatly fits the theme. Well, it fits the theme of this place for sure. Tucked into the corner of the upper Midwest, formed by two of the Great Lakes, and bordered on its west side by North America's largest river, Wisconsin is framed by waterways and rich in various water features. Within its borders lie 15,000 lakes, most of them formed by glaciers some 10,000 years ago. The state is laced with more than 12,600 rivers and streams that trickle or surge over dozens of waterfalls that mesmerize many visitors every year. So each of Wisconsin's waterways has a story to tell, and together these stories create a complex tapestry woven together in time and space by the flow of Wisconsin's waters. So let's look into the book, starting with the first chapter, which is a big picture kind of chapter, addressing questions like how did oceans full of water wind up on planet Earth, and how much of that Earth's water is available to us. And it's that availability question that was a real eye-opener for me. This slide helps you to visualize how finite the Earth's water supply is. The largest blue circle on the left here represents all the Earth's water, all the water on the Earth, the total global supply. And the next largest blue circle, which is right here to the kind of southwest of that thing, southeast, this is all the fresh water, because the lion's share of the Earth's water is salt water in the oceans, 97%, more than 97%. And it's this tiny little circle down here. You might not even be able to see it. It's right below the second smallest circle. That's all of the fresh water and all the lakes, rivers, and streams on the planet. And so it's a very small fraction of the Earth's total global supply, a small fraction of 1% of the Earth's total global supply that is readily available for use by the world's plants and animals, and nearly 8 billion people now. And my hope is that with an awareness of this finite nature of the water supply, we'll be motivated to protect this precious resource. Another part of the big picture is the immense time frame for the geologic and natural history of our region. You see how this graphic starts way down here at the beginning, 4.5 billion years ago, and it winds its way up through the eons. The first place I'm going to stop is the Cambrian period, which is right there, Cambrian period. That's when life started to really expand and develop and diversify on the planet, but beginning about 545 million years ago. And this timeline continues through the millions of years, the eons, and the coming and disappearance of the dinosaurs and all these different geologic and processes and events, continental collisions, volcanic eruptions, floods by ancient seas, and eventually, and then in massive glaciers in the end. And all of recorded human history will fit within the last just sliver of time here on this graphic. The last 4 last few thousand years of the total 4.5 billion year history of the Earth. So chapter 1 of my book describes how these forces and processes shaped our states, landscapes, and waterways. And a really important aspect of this is that for most of its ancient history, the region that is now Wisconsin was tropical. This early in its history, you know, the Earth's crust was broken into several big pieces called plates, and they were jostled and moved around on the planet's mantle, something like bumper cars in an amusement park. And this process was called plate tectonics. And the plate on which Wisconsin rode, called the North American Plate, in Cambrian time, pre-Cambrian time, 600 million years ago, was down south of the equator. And over time, it took kind of a curly-Q path because of plate tectonics being bumped and moved around. Eventually crossed the equator going north about 350 million years ago, and kept moving and landed in its present position about 10 million years ago. And we're still moving. We're moving roughly southwest, about as fast as our fingernails are growing. So we won't notice it, but and beyond chapter 1 in my book, the next 4 chapters of the book cover regions of the state, which are sketched out here. And the book is designed so that you can read any of those chapters in any order that you want. You might want to read chapter 1 first to get a review of or introduction to geology and natural history. But each regional chapter, and we'll just take a quick tour of the chapters. Each regional chapter begins with a map like this one. It shows the sites to be visited with an introduction and the text to give a little more background on this part of the state. And it's followed by 4 to 6 sections of each state, each of which is dedicated to a waterway. So a total of 19 sites all across the state among those 4 chapters. And chapter 2 covers the northern highlands with its iconic lakes and the Lake Superior shore, 4 key rivers, including the Brule River in far northern Wisconsin, shown here. That's a river that I canoed a lot when I was a kid. Chapter 3 is called The Northeast Ridges and Lowlands. It explores some enticing waterfalls in the northeastern Wisconsin, like this one in Menominee County, as well as important rivers, the Bay of Green Bay, and the Upper Lake Michigan shore, including the famous Door County sites, such as this one at Peninsula State Park. Chapter 4, next is Chapter 4, the Southeast Glacial Showcase, covers the lower Lake Michigan shore with its dunes, beautiful dunes and other features. Covers Lake Winnebago, the Horicon Marsh, about which I'll talk a little more in a minute here, and the Yahara Lakes around Madison. This slide shows Big Springs, famous spot in the Arboretum, UW Arboretum. It feeds Lake Wingra, which is the smallest of the 5 lakes. And finally, our area here, chapter 5 covers the Driftless Area with its mysterious ancient rivers. This one you'll recognize, the Kickapoo. Can you see the canoeists in the photo there? They're right kind of in the middle of the photo. They popped into view just as Gail snapped that photo. This chapter also covers the lower Wisconsin River, Devil's Lake, and of course the vast valley of the Mississippi River, shown here from an overlook in Nelson Dewey State Park. So now we'll delve a little bit into a couple of sites in the book, and then at the end I'll talk about the Kickapoo River. And that's something I've been looking forward to, coming here to talk. So we'll start with a favorite destination for a lot of people. It's the Lake Superior shore, the south shore of Lake Superior. As in each of my sites, I tell the deep story of how this area was formed, and I follow it with a travel guide that will help you to get out there and see the evidence of the history for yourselves. The story of Lake Superior dates back to an event called the MidContinent Rift, in which a great crevice formed across a part of ancient North America about 1.1 billion years ago. A giant plume of magma, hot fluid rock, had worked its way up from deep in the mantle through cracks and crevices and opened up this crevice in the earth. Over a period of about 25 million years it took to do that. Check this image. None of the Great Lakes were here, of course. These are just shown for reference. But the rift itself, there's a reddish-brown area here, was stretched probably from what's now Kansas up through what would become the Lake Superior Basin, and then down into Michigan and possibly beyond. And this rift spewed untold tons of lava across the red-tinted area that you see there, creating layer upon layer of a dense black rock called basalt, black or dark brown. This now makes up the bedrock or the foundation of much of far northwestern Wisconsin. And in what would become the Lake Superior Basin, the land slowly subsided or sank into that zone of softer, more pliable rock beneath the crust of the earth. It's called the mantle. This created the huge trough-shaped depression where Lake Superior would eventually lie. And this subsidence, sinking, was due to the steadily increasing mass of basalt and other types of rock, including the famous Lake Superior sandstone, very distinctive reddish sandstone that lines the Bayfield Peninsula and the Apostle Islands. This picture was taken at Big Bay State Park on Madeline Island. This type of rock is stained reddish brown due to the presence of iron in the rock. And another geologic process that affected the Northern Highlands was the creation of the Wisconsin Dome. This is something I didn't know about until I started researching this stuff. It's this green tinted area in the north central part of the state. Just that whole part of the state got just slightly elevated, not dramatically, but just slightly domed up. Probably due to the rifting that I talked about before, and the subsidence had something to do with that. It became elevated just enough to make the land slope away from the center in all directions, east, south, west. And it's important because it determines how most of the water flows up there, how much most of the streams and rivers flow. They flow away from the center in all those directions. And yet another geologic event that helped to shape the Lake Superior shore occurred somewhere between 500 and 1 billion years ago, when the primitive North American continent collided with another continent to the southeast, and the collision compressed the crust of the earth. It caused blocks of land called fault blocks to be thrust upward. And such a fault block was raised up just south of and parallel to the Lake Superior shore. Now this map, all the white up here is Lake Superior, and this is the shore, the Apostle Islands, and the shores here. And then the Douglas Fault lies roughly along this line between this reddish shaded area and the gray area above it. And it's called the Douglas Fault. It created cliffs like this one at Pattison State Park near the city of Superior, the far northwest corner of the state. Here the Black River crashes over the Douglas Fault at Big Manitou Falls. It's the highest waterfall in the state. And the Douglas Fault crops up all along the shore. In various places, streams flow over it, and including the Amnicon River. This is another state park. It's just a little to the east of Pattison State Park. Beautiful little park with a lot of waterfalls. My chapter goes on to describe how the Apostle Islands and Shawamagon Bay were formed. And these are the Apostles out here off of the point of Bayfield Peninsula. Shawamagon Bay is this beautiful bay, big shallow bay. The cities of Ashland and Washburn are located on that bay. They were formed largely, all of this was formed largely by glaciers, which molded much of the landscape around the lake, along with the meltwaters of the glacier. And that's the water melting off the glacier when it was retreating that pooled up, creating these great big glacial lakes, big icy pools of water. And explained how the plant and animal communities developed in the area. Oh, I meant to say that the lakes deposit, the glacial lake deposited all of that red clay that you'll see if you go up to Lake Superior shore. There's a lot of red clay up there. The book explains how plant and animal communities developed in the area after the glacier retreated. And I also like to look into early human communities wherever I go, and along the lake shore there were archaic peoples who included the old copper culture. Beginning about 6,000 years ago, native people learned how to extract those shallow deposits of copper along the Lake Superior shore and also along other Great Lakes shores. This depiction I found on a Milwaukee Public Museum website. And they used that copper to make all kinds of tools and weapons and eventually personal ornaments out of from the copper that they mined. They're thought to be the world's first metalsmiths. And later came woodland peoples, and most recently the Ojibwe, who had expanded across much of northern Wisconsin when European explorers first arrived in the 1700s. By 1854, though, the U.S. government had reduced the Ojibwe lands to 8 reservations in the Lake Superior area. They're highlighted in yellow here. Oops. 3 of those reservations are on the shore, the Bad River Band, the Red Cliff Band, and then out on Madeline Island is a smaller part of the Bad River Band. Just a small fraction of the land that they're along the shore that their ancestors had occupied for thousands of years. And at the end of the Lake Superior shore section is a travel guide, as I said. In this case, I traced a route along the shore on highways and county roads that allow the best access to the sites that I describe in the book. And I'll read a sample of the travel guide just to give you a sense of how it goes. This part covers the shore around the town of Cornucopia. Highway 13 descends into the valley of the Siskiwit River, where Wisconsin's northernmost town, Cornucopia, overlooks Siskiwit Bay. Just west of town is the Lost Creek Bog State Natural Area, where rising lake levels have put the mouths of 3 creeks underwater. These 3 creeks all descend from the hills to the south, and one of them forms a gorgeous, secluded waterfall called Lost Creek Falls. A side trip there involves a 1.5-mile hike, highly recommended. One of Gail's and my favorite hikes. And then the travel guide then goes on to explain how you find the trailhead for this hike, and continues out of Cornucopia. Highway 13 passes the west end of the Apostle Islands National Lakeshore, famous for its intricately carved caves, pillars, and arches in colorful Lake Superior sandstone. Some of this stretch displays stunning flows of ice during winter, making the Bayfield Peninsula Ice Caves a world-renowned destination for hardy winter hikers and kayakers. Kayakers, to me, that's amazing. One of those kayakers is a crazy friend of mine who took this photo for me. So I don't think you'd get me out there now, but there's much more to explore in this area, as you can learn from my book. But now let's leave the Lake Superior shore, sample another place that I talk about, travel southeast across the state to Horicon Marsh, which appears in chapter 4 of the book. This great marsh, one of the largest freshwater cattail marshes in the world, was venerated by none other than the great writer and scientist Aldo Leopold in his classic A Sand County Almanac, in an essay entitled Marshland Elegy, as follows. Quote, "A dawn wind stirs on the great marsh. With almost imperceptible slowness, it rolls a bank of fog across the wide morass. Like the white ghost of a glacier, the mists advance, riding over phalanxes of tamarack, sliding over bog meadows heavy with dew. A single silence hangs from horizon to horizon." Now that's great writing. My Horicon story begins with that quotation. It's followed by the story of the marsh, beginning with how the basin of the marsh was scooped out, probably by several glaciers, beginning about 2.5 million years ago. And most of that carving was done by the most recent glacier, the one named after Wisconsin, and it created this huge basin that lies mostly in Dodge County. The northern part is in Fond du Lac County. That's 13 miles long, 4 miles wide. And it was then filled by that melting water that I talked about coming off the glacier as it retreated. It became a glacial lake, pool of icy melt water. Back then, the area was a tundra. It might have looked something like this artist's rendition. It would have hosted only the hardiest of ground cover species, lichens, mosses, some grasses, eventually stunted tree species. The animals in the area included woolly mammoths, which you see here, musk oxen, mastodons, caribou, and probably large cats. You can see a couple of those down in the corner here. It's possible that the Horicon area even boasted giant beavers larger than today's black bears, weighing in at 350 pounds. Evidence of such animals has been found in this and other areas of Wisconsin. And for many decades after the glacier had shaped the Horicon Marsh and was receding to the north, the area remained tundra, where the mammoth ranged across the plain, munching on grasses. Here's a picture of Gail getting to know the last remaining mastodon. This is a full-scale replica up at Horicon Marsh. It stands there like a sentinel looking out over the marsh. I love that thing. The mammoth went extinct by about 11,000 years ago, but it may have watched as humans moved into the area around 1,000 years before that time. And nearly every major prehistoric native culture known in the upper Midwest is thought to have used the Horicon Marsh at one time or another, including the paleo hunters who hunted the mammoths and other large mammals, followed by archaic cultures and other woodland native cultures. The word Horicon is derived from an Algonquin term meaning land of clean, pure water. And effigy mound builders had established camps and villages and built mounds all around the marsh between about 700 and 1200 AD. One of the best surviving clusters of mounds in the state can be viewed at Nitschke Mounds County Park near the southwest corner of the marsh, shown here. The Horicon Marsh story ends well, at least for the present. This is what it looks like today. But beginning about 1800 or so, the marsh went through a tortured period. It was first flooded to facilitate logging, followed by overhunting to the point where duck and other waterfowl populations were nearly wiped out. And later people drained it to allow for farming, which didn't work out. Here's a picture of how a plowed area where one attempt to farm the marsh just failed completely. In fact, draining and plowing the marsh caused the deep peat deposits under the marsh to dry out, and many of them caught fire and they burned for years. I don't know if you know about peat fires, they can burn for years. In the end, a lot of that peat had largely turned to muck. So it was a mess. But then in about 1921, concerned citizens began a long process of restoration, protection and then restoration of the marsh. And today it's completely protected. As you can see here, the northern part is the Horicon National Wildlife Refuge, the southern part, the Horicon Marsh State Wildlife Area. And the marsh is even recognized by the United Nations as a wetland of international importance. And you can walk through the marsh on boardwalks and earthen dikes and get close-up views of the various flowering plant species. This is a photo that Gail took of a milkweed flower with cattails behind it. The marsh hosts countless species of insects, including the endangered monarch butterfly, which depends on the milkweed. And you'll see amphibians and reptiles and, of course, birds. Hundreds of birds, more than 300 species of birds, including pelicans, egrets, herons, swans, cranes, ibises, use the marsh, especially during times of migration. This photo and the first one you saw in the marsh at dawn were taken by Jack Bartholomew of the Friends of Horicon Marsh. And again, we owe these friends groups, including your group, a great debt of gratitude for their ongoing work to restore, protect, and restore these places like this in Horicon Marsh. And as with all my stories, I follow this one with a travel guide. Basically a driving route around the marsh on county and state highways, but you can bike it. Lots of people bike it. And you'll want to start your trip with a visit to the Horicon Marsh Visitor and Education Center. It's run by the Friends of the Horicon Marsh, an impressive collection of fascinating artifacts and exhibits and information of all kinds. And from the Visitor Center, you can take hikes all over that marsh on miles of trails. To finish the Horicon Marsh story, I'll just do another reading from my book. It takes us back to Aldo Leopold. In 1948, Leopold expressed some pessimism about restoration of the Horicon Marsh. Observing the brutal and widespread disturbances to the marsh, he feared that someday, quote, the last crane will trumpet his farewell and spiral skyward from the great marsh, unquote. No doubt Leopold would be pleased to see that his pessimism was unwarranted in the long run. The marsh has survived those disturbances to become a thriving marshland ecosystem. And indeed, this is one of the most remarkable stories that I've ever heard, and I've read a lot of restoration stories. A story of natural restoration that can occur when people value and work together to protect and preserve an area that they care about, just like the Kickapoo Valley Reserve is doing. Well, now the fun part. As I said, wherever I go, I like to present I like to research and talk a little bit about the local waterways. And right here, of course, we have our very own Kickapoo River to talk about. There's probably not much I can tell most of you about the Kickapoo that you don't already know. I'll focus on my strong suit, which is the ancient history of the river. Here's an aerial view of the Driftless Area. And as you know, the Kickapoo lies right in the heart of it. It's about the biggest valley. Whoop, well, it's not cooperating. Yeah, it runs down through, that's the Kickapoo Valley, the biggest evident one there other than the Wisconsin. The Driftless Area is actually an old plateau that's severely eroded by all those old streams and rivers. The plateau was once capped by several layers of dolomite, which is a type of rock that is chemically derived from limestone, much more resistant to erosion. These layers of dolomite were laid down at the bottoms of a series of ancient seas that lay here. And back in Paleozoic era, which is about 540 million to 250 million years ago. And life in those oceans evolved quite dramatically. Remember, these were tropical seas because we were south of the equator at the time. This is a diorama of a coral reef, one of the first known reefs on the planet. Existed sometime around 430 million years ago near the present-day location of Milwaukee. This is from the Milwaukee Public Museum. Life there included shelled animals and like clinging brachiopods and crawling trilobites. These tall flower-like things here are actually animals called crinoids. And the chief predator in the system were these octopus-type critters here, some of them quite large. They're called cephalopods. And the wastes and remains of these kinds of creatures accumulated on the floors of these ancient shallow seas for millions, many millions of years. And when the last of the ancient seas had withdrawn, Wisconsin was mostly covered by layers of dolomite, up to 600 feet thick in some areas. These bluffs along the Mississippi River are topped with layers of dolomite, deposited hundreds of millions of years ago on those sea floors. After the ancient seas had finally departed, erosion took over as the main geologic force, and for the next 300 million years or more, erosion continued. It might not seem like a dynamic process, erosion, but it created these beautiful bluffs on the Mississippi and elsewhere. And the most recent stage in that erosive period was the Ice Age, a period of more than 2 million years, something like 2.5 million years, during which all of that dolomite across most of the state was eroded away. But of course, here in the driftless area, none of those glaciers had their way. Here the dolomite layers resisted erosion by wind, flowing water, and frost for hundreds of millions of years until erosion finally broke through those hard dolomite coverings and started chewing down through the much softer layers of sandstone underlying the dolomite in the driftless area here. And all of these valleys that lie in the mass, they lie in masses of sandstone that is more than 500 million years old. Now, because so much of the world's land was molded by glaciers beginning a mere 2 million years ago, the driftless landscape, never touched by glaciers, is ancient by comparison. It's hundreds of millions of years old. And these rivers have been carving it up for most of that time. So as I wrote in my book, just as the driftless area is one of the oldest landscapes in the world, the Kickapoo and its many tributary arteries make up one of the world's oldest river systems. And what's cool about the Kickapoo is that these layers of ancient rock are clearly on display on some of the bluffs that line the river. This is a trip that Gail and I took a couple of years ago. That's Gail in the front of the canoe there. These are mostly layers of sandstone. Some of these bluffs are capped with thin layers of dolomite. And these cliff-hanging plant communities are astounding just for their ability to grow. On these bluffs. And they're quite beautiful and rare. These rare plant communities host rare species, such as Sullivan's coolwort, classified by the Wisconsin DNR as a special concern plant. Biologists think that it and other ancient species were here before the glaciers arrived. So this leads some researchers to think that the driftless area was something called a refugium landscape. That is an area where special circumstances have allowed the survival of natural communities that became extinct all in surrounding lands. So lichens, hardy plant species, some mammals such as chipmunks and moles, possibly some amphibians and reptiles, They might have survived the frigid glacial times by taking refuge, hunkering down in the deepest valleys of the driftless area. And after the ice retreated, these species populations would then have slowly grown and spread across the state. So it's possible that the bulk of the state's natural communities were derived from the driftless area ecosystems. And along with the plant and animal communities that spread through the area after the glacier came humans who used the valley as long as 12,000 years ago. Evidence gathered from more than 450 archaeological sites just in the upper Kickapoo Valley alone show that human occupation spanned from the paleo through the woodland traditions. Such evidence and sites include rock shelters, camp and village sites, burial mounds, and petroglyphs, or rock carvings, like this one. This is a fragile bird petroglyph carved into sandstone on a high ridge over the Kickapoo. The photo is from the Mississippi Valley Archaeology Center at UW-La Crosse. And around 2,500 years ago, a group of woodland Indians apparently used the valley as a seasonal hunting ground. At some point, a small band called the Ocoche, O-C-O-C-H-E, lived in the valley, and now some sources refer to parts of the driftless area as the Ocooch Mountains, O-C-O-O-C-H. I believe that name is derived from the Ocoche people, named after this tribe. This photo is from a website called the Ocooch Mountains of Richland County. When Europeans first arrived in the valley, it was occupied by Sauk, Meskwaki, and Ho-Chunk people. Some of these people were making use of the shallow lead deposits south of here in what would become the lead district, long before European immigrants discovered the lead deposits. In fact, for one source that I read said possibly for 8,000 years, they'd been mining lead in small quantities and using it to make body paint and decorate their clothing and to bury certain precious trinkets with their dead. Now, according to some sources, there was an indigenous group called the Kickapoo living in the valley before 1700. But my understanding is that it was another Algonquin-speaking tribe of indigenous people who named the river the Kickapoo, which means, quote, he moves about, standing now here, now there, in reference to the river's winding nature. And as you know, much of the upper Kickapoo Valley is now protected by the Kickapoo Valley Reserve, controlled jointly by the Ho-Chunk Nation and the state of Wisconsin, and recognized as a national natural landmark. And I spent as much time and as much space as I could in my book to describe the efforts of the folks at the Kickapoo Valley Reserve, along with the Ho-Chunk, the prairie enthusiasts, the DNR, and other groups, to preserve the valley and to restore prairies and wetlands along the Kickapoo River to their natural pre-settlement state. And I summarized the great story of how this visitor center was built and why. My story of the Kickapoo Valley covers a lot more history. As with all of my stories, I follow with a travel guide, as I said before, and I'll read a sample from the travel guide to close here. This is from a segment that describes the Hemlock Trail. It runs to the top of Mount Pisgah in Wildcat Mountain State Park. I'm sure many of you are familiar with this. It's one of my all-time favorite hikes, and I took this photo from the Hemlock Trail. And the reading goes, this is from the travel guide again. The west side loop passes through majestic stands of white pines and virgin hemlock overlooking the river. Rare old-growth trees, for this part of the park was never logged. The trail meanders away from and back toward the river several times as it crosses the little valleys cut into the land by seasonal tributaries that feed the Kickapoo. On this trail, hikers climb through time, many thousands of years for every foot of elevation. as they rise among the layers of Cambrian sandstone. The east side of the loop trail passes spectacular sandstone outcroppings intricately eroded by wind, water, and ice. And that, friends, is just one reason why we love your Kickapoo Valley so much. Thank you again for inviting me. It's a pleasure and an honor to speak to your group. I'll be happy to sign copies of any of my 3 books for you if you wish, and when we're done, but now I'd welcome any questions you might have. So, thank you.
What's the average depth of the seas?
Oh, they were the ones that...
Can you repeat the question?
Oh, sure. The question is, what was the average depth of the seas? And you're talking about the ancient seas that invaded in the Paleozoic time. I honestly don't know that, but I do know that they were relatively shallow, especially around, they were probably hundreds of feet deep, not thousands. That's what I understand from my reading. I don't actually know the average, but none of those seas were deep seas like the Pacific or the Atlantic. Do you happen to know?
I want to follow up.
Oh, okay. Hundreds of feet deep, and that's partly why we were able to grow. The seas were able to grow coral reefs over on what's now the shore of Lake Michigan. Sorry, the Lake Michigan shore. The reefs need warm, shallow, clear water to grow, and that's what they were. So, yes.
So that was when this land was in an equatorial position?
Yes.
Right? Okay. So it was close to the equator, enough temperature.
Yes, warm enough to grow
One
corals.
interesting thing is that I'm a soil chemist.
Oh,
and,
okay.
One interesting thing is that nobody has been able to precipitate dolomite in the lab. Okay?
Oh, huh.
So it's hugely important in Earth in the Earth crust, right?
Oh, yeah.
It's all over.
Huh.
But nobody has been able to make it.
Huh.
So it's something from hundreds of millions of years ago that we still don't know how exactly happened. So it's like calcite we can, but dolomite with magnesium in the molecule we just can't do it. Can't replicate it.
Yeah.
It's one of those geology mysteries that nobody has solved yet.
I didn't know that. I knew the question was about, or the comment is about how dolomite is formed, and I understood that magnesium the chemistry of the ocean replaces the calcium, which makes limestone, with magnesium, which makes it harder, right?
Right.
But I didn't know it was a mystery. I thought it was just something that would happen.
Slower dissolution rate and more resistant to acid inputs that normally come from CO2 from the atmosphere.
Right.
But it's very ancient and nobody has been able to fully replicate the process.
I'm glad to know that. Thank you. Yes?
Question about your writing process. Once you decide you're going to write a book, how do you decide to write a book, and then how long does it take you to develop it?
Well, I just, one of the things two things spurred me to write the State Parks book. This book's kind of a follow-on to the waterways is another way to explore Wisconsin's geology and natural history. State Parks was my first idea, and I had fun with a book called Roadside Geology of Wisconsin, written for lay readers. Bob Dott, great writer, great geologist. And he took highways. He took highway routes and described what you'd see as you drove along and explained how those rocks got there. So I thought, the state parks are a great place to learn that. And I looked and held my breath and crossed my fingers and I hope nobody wrote a book about the state parks. And I was lucky enough to find that they really had not. So I was able to, I'm sorry, I forgot to repeat the question. The question's, okay. Yes, so that's how I got inspired. Plus, I'd seen that map, the landscapes of Wisconsin, which I showed, that was what gave me the awareness of the fact that our state is really pretty interesting. We don't have the Rocky Mountains or the Sierras, or we don't have the Caribbean Ocean, but we've got a lot of interesting stuff going on. So that was the motivation. And then when I was fortunate to have a lull in my regular working job, which was revising those textbooks. So I had some time, and I just started exploring the state parks. And since then, I've retired from what I call my day job, and so I've had more time, and that's why I was able to have time to explore the waterways. But in each case, I explored the sites for 2 fall seasons and 2 spring seasons. Summers are really, summers can get a little hot and buggy, and winter is harder. But mostly fall and spring, I would do the research for a couple of years, pull it all together, and then begin outlining and writing, and that would take another year. And then the press takes a year to produce the book. So that's the general process. Yeah. And one person was interested in the fact that I didn't start this until I was close to 60. So those of you who have dreams of, why not? It's never too late. Anyway. Yes?
So approximately how many miles do you think you canoed or
Canoed.
driven, or all total estimate, a rough estimate? How many miles did you get all your research and going to these different places?
It's another good question I've never figured out. I would always try to combine, if I was doing state parks, I'd try to combine a number, so be efficient, and the same with the waterways. We didn't do as much canoeing as I wanted to, but so canoeing is kind of a negligible amount. But I've canoed a lot in my younger years. So, but driving, gee, 800, 1,000, yeah, I don't know, 800 or 1,000 miles, something like that. Yeah.
As a side note, I have winter kayaked the Kickapoo.
Oh, yeah.
It's worth it.
Oh,
Yeah,
wow, I bet.
it's beautiful.
Yeah.
There's a lot of frozen, like in areas.
Ice flows. Yeah. Yeah.
Not nearly the traffic either.
No. No.
Yes, the back.
In all your travels and sites that you saw, did you keep track of all the different animal species and birds and why they came here or there or migrated? Did you follow a little bit of that when you were doing all this geology?
The question is, did I sort of keep a record of the animal and plant and bird life that I saw as I was researching? Not enough. I mean, we did that with the Horicon Marsh because there's so much rich bird life there. Gail has helped me a lot with understanding what plants we're looking at. My focus has been the big picture of the geological processes and how they did what they did. And then I would do a lot of library research to understand plant communities and animal communities, but I didn't keep a running record. No, I did not. Not a bad idea, though. Would have been a great idea. Yeah.
Your next book?
Actually, I've done that a little bit. The next book will be on the Ridges Sanctuary, which is up in Door County. It's a small preserve, and I've had to teach myself about ecology and some botany and zoology, like I did geology for these books. So there's a lot of that in there. That won't be out for a while, though. But.
I have a question.
Yes?
Do you think there's any natural caves in this area?
Oh, sure. Yeah, and I wish I knew where they were. There was one big cave. Well, of course, in the Driftless Area, there's a lot of caves because it's made of this dolomite or a lot of it is dolomite and erodible sandstone that water has seeped forever, for hundreds of millions of years, making these caverns underground. And I know of Crystal Cave up north and the Blue Mound Cave? So, Cave of the Mounds. I wrote about that in my rocks book. And I'm sure that there are probably dozens and hundreds of little. Wyalusing's got caves. Yeah, Gail's reminding me Wyalusing State Park has an interesting series of caves. And I think there are some in the Kickapoo Valley Reserve, aren't there? I don't know specifically, but. What?
Rock shelters.
Rock shelters. Yeah, they're not exactly caves, but they're overhangs where people took shelter many, many times over the past thousands of years. So, yeah. Yeah, I've never been there. Kickapoo Caverns. Kickapoo Caverns. Yes?
I'm wondering about the importance of the different rock layers to the native people that were here. Because I was looking outside and there were like basalt axes, and then there were the arrowheads were made of other kinds of rocks, and there was a variety of things. I was wondering if you have a sense of how that fits and how that this Driftless area impacted how the different communities were able to, the different indigenous people were able to use that resource, because some of the other areas don't quite have it, right?
Right. I just know that they took the harder rock that they found. That was what they needed for their arrowheads and spearheads and hammer rocks. So, and that would be Dolomite. I'm sure they wouldn't. So a lot of the sandstone around here is just too soft to make much out of. And honestly, that's a question I don't know a lot about either. The question is, how did the different rocks, how did the native people, the indigenous people, make use of the different types of rock in the rock layers, and how that it might have influenced their culture or vice versa. And I don't know enough about it to tell you the answer, I'm sorry, other than the hard rocks that they would find. And there might have been a lot of trading too. There was a huge trade network among native nations, and long before Europeans arrived. There was people trading on the rivers, using the rivers as their highways and trading things from Mexico, and just a lot of trading going on. So I honestly, but I don't know the answer to your question, sorry. Anybody else? Yes?
You had a slide of plants that grow in the Kickapoo along the river.
Yeah.
You named a rare plant, but I couldn't figure out which plant it was.
It wasn't there.
No, it wasn't there. No. Yeah. It was wild geranium. I had a picture of Sullivan. The question is what plants were in my slide. I had a slide of the Sullivan's coolwort. Sullivant with a T, coolwort. No, and I fudged on that a little bit. I had a slide of the Sullivan's coolwort, but it was just not a good slide. It probably would have been better than lying about it. I didn't actually lie, but I sort of implied. Yeah. And the slide had what? Wild geranium. Okay. Yeah, you all know better than me. Are any of those plants that I showed endangered or rare? No, they're all weeds.
But northern monkshood is the one that would be growing the sandstone.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, had I to do it over again, I would get a better photo. But any other questions? Good questions. Thanks a lot, everybody.